Hi, I'm Tiffany Yates Martin, the founder of Foxprint Editorial, author of Intuitive Editing, and a career book editor. What you're about to watch is an interview with Liz Fenton and Lisa Steinke, two fantastic authors who've had enormous success as authors by any measure, and then ran into some stumbling blocks in their career, and were brutally honest enough to talk about a lot of it in their podcast, We Fight So You Don't Have to. There's a rejection series that they ran. I'll put the episode numbers below. This is our interview. They were really frank with me. I want to talk a little bit more about some of what they talk about as far as their setbacks and stumbles and challenges they're currently experiencing. They are incredibly honest about the business, about what it takes to succeed, and about what happens when you don't, and how to create a career with longevity. I hope you will watch. If you would like to see the transcript, I'll put a link below, and you can also see the blog post that I wrote about this that sort of sums up what we talk about on my website, foxprinteditorial.com. I will put a link to that below as well. Hope you enjoy. Liz Fenton and Lisa Steinke have been lifelong best friends since 1988. I was very inspired by your website where you did it chronologically, so I have modeled this after that. In 2006, you start writing together and produce two manuscripts, which do not get bought. 6 years later, your third manuscript, Your Perfect Life, sells to Atria, Simon & Schuster, who also buy your next two novels. You shift to Lake Union, where your first contracted novel, The Good Widow, kicks ass and becomes a bestseller. You contract for 3 more novels with them for a total of 7. In 2020, you become monthly on-air contributors on the local news, hosting Liz and Lisa's Book Club, a segment where you discuss your favorite novels, and you start a podcast, We Fight So You Don't Have to. And in March of 2022, you released your recent Rejection series, 4 podcasts that focus on what's happened in your careers over the last couple of years. And that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. We were just discussing before we started recording that everybody's talking about this. You have hit a real chord, and your openness and vulnerability and courage to talk about what have been some struggles really seem to have resonated with a lot of authors. So you two have 7 published novels. You are very prominent in the writing community and in the field. By all accounts and all appearances, you are massively successful. And yet you have a rejection series of podcasts. What can you just sort of fill everybody in a little bit who hasn't maybe heard it yet on what was going on in your writing career that prompted this?
Well, Lisa's looking at me like we have like a weird like nonverbal thing where I know that she looked at me and like, you answer. So, I think that I think we were kind of first of all, say authors are not okay right now. And we kind of talk about that a little bit. We've had such an outpouring of support and really like relatability to what we talked about. But for us personally, why it was time, it's really felt like we had nothing to lose. I think a year ago, we wouldn't have been ready to talk about what we were going through. And we also were still really committed to, because we were out on submission most of this time, really having this face on social media, because we're worried if we look like we're failing, then no one will want to sign us. It's this weird catch. Sometimes you can't feel like you can be honest because you have to always look like you're succeeding, or the publisher doesn't want to take a chance on you. So I think for us, 2 things: we had nothing to lose. And also, to be totally honest, we didn't really think anyone would listen to it. So we've been a little bit like, I think it's why you hear all that honesty, because you can tell we were kind of thought we were talking into a vacuum.
So you say you had nothing to lose, and that's, 2 things. One, you had nothing to lose, but you are out on submission. And you just said you kind of have to have this patina of success. So what was your thinking with that? But also, you didn't have to do this. Maybe you had nothing to lose, but something drew you to be this open and honest. I'm really curious to figure out what that was.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think for me anyway, I was just in a hole and just feeling so awful every day, and missing writing so much, and you're just kind of waiting. for these editors to tell you whether or not what you've written is any good and if you're going to have a place in their publishing house. And we just kept getting we're going to step aside. And I think after just so many of those, I don't know if we just lost hope or I don't know what it was, but the timing was just such that I think we were talking about what should we do on our podcast nest? What should we talk about? We had nothing. We had no content. We talked about the dog, the cat, everything, our entire history. And one of us was just like, let's just talk about what's really going on here. Maybe, I had spoken to my husband in a particularly low moment a few weeks before that. And he was like, Lisa, everyone's been in a hole for 2 years in it, in their own way, whether it's, their job or their family or COVID or a mix. And so why don't you just talk about it or write about it? One or the other, but just get it out. I think part of it was like, stop talking to me about it. And it did feel like the right time to just lay it out there. And like Liz said, I don't think we really knew how many people were going to resonate with what we were saying, but it was amazing. I mean, the outpouring of support and just people wanting to hear that. So I just think it was just the timing was right. And we really didn't feel like we had anything to lose, even though you're right. We do.
Technically we do, but I think, we just had kind of had it. And also I think we tried to actually talk about it about 4 months before. And we mentioned this in the podcast, but we actually had recorded something and it wasn't good. We wanted, I think it's something you need to tackle in the right way. Right. And I think we were still just not in the right place to do it. It wasn't good. And then
it was very stilted and robotic.
It didn't record correctly. And
it didn't record.
So we were like, oh, I think the universe is telling us this is a piece of crap podcast. So we walked away from it. And then what we did this time was just, we were a lot more organized. And we really what is the message that we want to send? We don't want to be throwing anyone under the bus. We don't want to be whining or complaining. We want this to be productive. And so when we came at it from that point of view and structured them, it felt a lot easier.
So I was just going to add, I think also so many people had been asking us when's your next book coming? And we just felt like not that we were lying, but that we were just dodging the question and just, stepping aside from the question, and we just needed to finally just answer it. We don't know. We don't know when our next book is coming.
Does it feel better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of pressure on authors in this whole business, actually, I think, and especially with social media for everybody, but particularly in something like this, as you point out, to look like you're successful, to look like everything's going great, to always be hyping whatever you're working on. And that can start to feel draining because I think it creates a false idea of what this career is. And one of the things I think can make it difficult for authors who are just starting their careers or in the middle of their careers is to sort of, I think, Liz, you said you're pulling the curtain back on Oz. Because of this thing where we're all like, oh, let's look as successful as we can. I think there's an idea with newer authors, especially, that you get your publishing contract and your bones are made and you're going to be a New York Times bestseller and everything is smooth sailing. And I have been in the business a long time. You guys have too. I do a feature called How Writers Revise that sort of I'm jumping off of with this, where authors talk about the many setbacks and challenges and stumbles that are part of a writing career. What expectations did you guys have when you first started? You had 2 manuscripts that did not sell. So it feels like you would have been grounded in the reality of what this business was, but you both said this still hit you really hard. What expectations did you have and how have those shifted?
Yeah, I think, it took us 5 years to get an agent in our 3rd manuscript. And then we had arguably one of the best agents in the business. We were at one of the best agencies. And so I really thought I know both of us felt like this is it, but that debut book that came out at Atria, I mean, it didn't do very well. We were very lucky that they signed us to 2 more books. Looking back, I honestly cannot believe they did, but they did it before our first book came out. So they didn't know like we weren't going to do well. So we did stay alive that way. I think the biggest thing, 2 things. I think the really weird thing about publishing is your past successes do not dictate the rest of your career, where in other like in other industries, like your history, like you are given, like if you are been really great and maybe you don't have a good, like you'll get more time. And I think in publishing, there's just so much, there's so many great authors and great creators out there. You don't have that same thing, but I'll never
used to, but that's changed.
Not now,
for sure.
Changed. And then the other thing I'll say, when we came over to the Amazon imprints, and as you mentioned, The Good Widow was our first book with them. We were switching genre. It was a huge success. I mean, that book still sells. And Tiffany, you were such a great editor on that book. And one of the reasons it's such a great book is because of you. And
you're too generous. That was y'all, but thank you.
No, seriously, girl. but my point is so that book still sells really well. I mean, I just looked last night. I mean, that book has sold hundreds of thousands of copies, right? And I remember sitting with another author, and I was editing Girls Night Out, and I had driven up to LA to have dinner with her, and she was a couple books ahead of us. And I was like quitting my day job to write full time. And she said, "Hey, that's fine. And I'm happy you're doing it, but this may not last forever. And I just want you to know that." And at the time I was like, she's negative. Like, I really like, I think I told you, Lisa, I was like, but it doesn't. And she actually was trying to nicely be helpful. And I think it's okay to quit your day job, but I think you have to understand that when The Good Widow was succeeding, we truly thought we would continue, the trajectory would continue up.
Weirdly, I think our expectations were higher the farther into the process we got. Like when we started out, we understood we're a debut, and while everyone's really, excited about us at the publishing house, it takes a lot to break out. And so when it didn't, we weren't like, oh, how did it not break out? Like we were like, okay, we'll just keep going. And then there's this moment at the Good Widow party to Amazon, was not a Good Widow party, but it was a party that Amazon threw, but it felt like the Good Widow party because it had a drink named after the Good Widow and all these things. And I remember I looked at Liz and she looked at me, and we were like, we've made it. Like, this is it. We're finally here. All the hard work is paid off. And we actually thought it would just keep going. And so I think, to answer your question, our expectation was higher the further we got into it, for whatever reason.
Which makes sense because you were having such success. And I do think there is this idea, we're all modeling, I think, after the runaway successes, where we all look at Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or, who have you. And their careers do have longevity and they do continue to build. But I think that's so much the exception and not the rule. And you can have a New York Times bestseller even, and then who knows what will happen after that. Or you can take Catherine Center and I were talking, I think she told me it was her 6th book that hit her. So it can go either way, but we don't really talk about that. So what can authors do? This is how writers survive. So how have you are learning it right now. Your expectations, I'm assuming, have shifted to some degree. In what way? I know, Liz, you said you went back to your job.
I did. And for a couple reasons. I mean, listen, I had been there a very long time. I had worked in the industry for almost 20 years, and I wrote full-time for 3 years, and I needed a break. We were doing a book a year, and I was really burnt out on both things, and I really needed a break, but I did miss it. Even when we were still successful, there was a part of me. I'm an extrovert. I work in a very extroverted industry, and being a writer, as you know, is very introverted. So I did go back. I would, even if I hated the job, I would have had to go back because we're making like $1 a month right now, and we have to split it. So we're making like 50 cents each. but luckily it's a job I really love. But I think that I mean, I think like it's interesting you mentioned Catherine Center, because I remember when her sixth book broke out, she actually did a post and she said, everybody thinks this is my debut book. This is
Right.
like
I remember that too.
Her seventh book. And I remember like really relating to that and thinking, like, a lot of people think The Good Widow was our first book because it was a different genre and a different publisher. So I think that it's I just think we have to all be honest, because I think if you think everyone's having all this success, but you're not, it's really easy to want to give up. And I think it's important for authors to be like, hey, I have had some success, but there's a lot of failures and that's normal. Because I think when you lose motivation, which is kind of where we've been at for about the last year, you start thinking everybody's getting a book deal, everybody's getting a movie option. And it really makes you feel like, what am I even doing? Like, I can't do this. And I actually opening up and hearing from people actually has almost made me excited to write again, which is something I have not felt in a while. And so there is something to that, like understanding that it's not just you, because I think to be able to create these things, you have to have confidence, you have to be excited, and you have to have hope. And so I think if we just are all honest with each other, a lot of us can recapture those things. Because I've just felt that just in like, since we released the puck, I was like, oh my gosh, like I almost, and I haven't even told you this, Lisa, but I was like, I almost think I want to like write again. Like,
like,
because
that's breaking news, Tiffany. That's breaking news.
Y'all heard it here first.
Yeah, you just broke some serious news. That's exciting to hear. We've had very different sort of reactions to what's been going on. I move into a mode of like wanting to figure out how to get them a manuscript that's going to work. Like I'll just keep like back when we were first writing, after the first two didn't sell, I had to really convince Liz to do that third book that ended up being our book, Your Perfect Life. She was like, it was very similar. It felt very similar to what was going on right now. Not that I was having to convince her this time, it was different, but it was more like I saw similar themes to how she was acting and talking and feeling. And it sort of felt like this time for me, though, I don't know if I'm going to try to do that. Maybe we're too far in. I think that's how far I was in the hole, that I was thinking, I don't, maybe this will just be it. Maybe it's just time to stop pushing so hard, because maybe the universe or the editors or everyone combined is just telling us you're done. And that's really where I got to, over here.
Is your definition of success changing? For a lot of especially newer authors, I think success is, I'm going to make millions of dollars. I'm going to be a New York Times bestseller. And as we've discussed, those are so far the outlier that it's like saying, my retirement plan is to buy a lottery ticket. So I think we do have to think about how we define what being a writer is, what a writing career is, how you have longevity, and what success means to you. Has that changed for you guys?
It has for me. And a lot of it is just that I took that time to write full time, which was this huge bucket list goal for me. And I found like, you know what, like I actually, and sorry, my dogs, I have 5,000 dogs in there.
Oh, we know.
Yeah.
Everyone
watching
knows.
your windows right now. So it's like full alert over here. But it changed a lot for me, because now, like, even if like this next book sells and it, is a Reese book pick and does all the things, I still want this other career too. And I just want, it's all about having joy in what you're doing. And I know that's a very cliche thing, but what I realized from this whole process and walking away is that the joy for me is like fitting that time into write and feeling like it's something special. And maybe that is a book every other year, like a hardcover and then a paperback, rather than being in this rat race of like the book every year and, all these things. For me, it's really changed. And I think for me also too, and I've said this to Lisa several times, this past year, I felt like we each bring different things to the table, right? And that are valuable. And, Tiffany, you've edited, 4 books of ours. So you like know how we work. And I told Lisa a couple months ago, I said, I feel like I'm not bringing like my piece to it anymore because I've lost that joy. Like that, like, like the heart, I'm more the bleeding heart, like my bleeding heart shit that I'm bringing. I don't feel like I'm bringing it anymore. And I kind of feel like I'm in a place I could bring that again, but I think it's changing my expectations that around it. I don't know if I really answered it, but things that I've really changed what I think success I think success for us is like, we're happy, we're consistently writing, we're enjoying what we're doing, and we're writing what we want to write.
It sounds like you guys.
That's it right there. It's writing what we want to write. I think we just that's so easy to fall into that trap of like what you think the editors want or the market wants, and honestly, no one knows what they want. It just, you have to just write from, and this is another cliche thing, but just write from your heart or write what you want. And then it usually will be, that's what we did with Your Perfect Life. We just finally were like, let's just write what we want. We were trying to write all this other stuff and it was a disaster. And so once you just write what you know or love, or it translates.
You guys both, one of you said in the podcast that I think you both said that you really like writing to contract, but I have interviewed so many authors for the How Writers Revise feature who have told me that the happiest they ever felt in writing was when they lost a contract or they lost their publisher or before they got published, for the exact reason you just said, that it became about the work and not the product, which I think that's something that we have to learn in this profession, is to separate out the art creative side of you and the business commodity side of what you're producing, because they're two different things. And you can create a career based on whichever way you want to go. I mean, there are a lot of authors who are very successful with that sort of product commodity mindset. And like you guys were saying, let's get a book out. Let's make it be what they want, what's selling. But to me, and it sounds like to y'all too, it's become more about your process now than the product.
Yeah. And I might have like agreed with the off contract thing before we wrote 2 books in the middle of our career that I'm not sure are going to sell. And so for me, like, I need to know, and this is such a personal thing. And at least I don't even want to speak for you, but I think you feel,
and I agree with
the book's coming out, or like, I don't want to do, I already wrote 2. Like, I want to know that what we're, and that's fine. And we also don't mind notes or having, and to working with us, we like getting notes. We don't like to write in a bubble, and I think we're pretty editable. So that's also a thing for us. Like we enjoy that.
We like the process of the whole team coming in and like, and we have each other. So we're already have a second read in our own little group. But we like that process of like, when you came in and then you give your edit letter, even though at first you've got to
Orange Theory.
Yeah,
you told me.
Yes.
That quote lives on for me.
You have to digest the edit letter and then you jump in, but it's I don't know, we like that process, but for us, and we've talked about this a lot because we've heard from so many authors, and there's a lot of authors that really either don't want to think about the business side or don't get the business side or don't, whatever it is. But that business side is really important too. You've got to, there has to be a balance. I think if just trying to write in a bubble without thinking about the business side, at least for us, would be hard, because we do want it to end up somewhere.
Y'all talked about in the podcast, and I think this is something writers have to do to survive, is to diversify to a degree, or I guess be light on your feet. And y'all had mentioned several things that you've got going. You have some nonfiction projects that you said you were working on, children's book. You have an option that's been renewed 3 times for which one? The year we turned 40. And then you have, I can't remember which one, that you're collaborating with 2 screenwriters, the Davids.
The Status of All Things.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So is that part of has your strategy shifted for your career since all this happened? And is that part of it?
The thing with the children's book and the nonfiction was really us in the last couple of years, and maybe particularly me, like trying to find excitement in writing. And I think Lisa, to her credit, if I came to her excited about something, like she's just like, okay, like we'll do it. Cause I'd be like, I think I'm excited about this. And
Yeah.
both those things I think need confidence, and we had kind of lost that confidence. And I think particularly with the nonfiction project, we could probably revisit it now. I think it fits in with a lot of stuff that's going on. But I think that was more me like having an identity crisis, and Lisa coming along for the ride, which I appreciate, Lisa. Thank you.
But also it was that, but then also we have always kind of been thinking about screenplays and other books, and this brought that back up. But mentioning the business side earlier, we have always thought, because it is hard with just all your eggs in just the book basket, you do want to think about how else can I contribute and sell things. And so I think it was a blend of both of those thoughts.
Yeah, and I'll add this from talking to a lot of every time I
only when you talk. Only when you talk.
I have it on.
It's really weird, but only when you talk.
I can actually put them away if you guys want to. But I was going to say, I do think from hearing from even some household name authors that they're all having to diversify right now to continue to make a living. They're having to podcast. They're having to they're having to write under pen names, because it's really, really hard to make a living now as an author, probably harder than it's ever been, unless you're one of those John Grishams or like those auto buys, or, where it doesn't matter. Like when you reach that level, it's different. Like it's a different ball game than being on the New York Times bestseller list once or twice. Like those are two different things. But I do think to survive, like I think you do need to be open to diversifying.
You guys are talking about the sort of the merging of the art and the business. And I completely agree with you that we are not just creators. We're not just artists. If you want to have a writing career, whatever that means, and if you want longevity, you'd better treat it like a business. And in business, you do diversify. You do stay light on your feet. I hate this term, but you pivot. So,
oh yeah, girl. There's lots of pivoting.
Like, how can authors come into this? How do you balance, I guess, those two things? You talked about, Liz, I think it was you who said in the podcast, you talk about how, like you pitched the Audible original, and you said that you got a rather crushing rejection for that. That was pretty incontrovertible. And as a result, it further hampered your confidence. We're talking about the Audible originals thing. As a result, it further hampered your confidence in yourselves as authors. Both of you mentioned, I think, imposter syndrome, which I'm the poster child for imposter syndrome. And yet you're having to navigate those business realities that should not have anything to do with you as a human being or you as an artist, but it does, because this is an incredibly vulnerable, naked pursuit in which you are putting much of your personal self. How can you balance these two things? How can you treat it both like a business and also be true to your creative soul? How can you recover when all these rejections, all the things that are going to happen in a career keep you from doing the thing that's going to help you be successful if you persist?
For me, the business side of it was what got me out of bed in July, August 2020. Because I knew that Lake Union didn't want to give us a contract for our latest book because we weren't selling. It was very clear. It wasn't because we couldn't write. And for me, looking at it from their point of view, looking at it from their business point of view, it helped me. It wasn't and I think for other authors, that's important to think about. It's not your talent. It really is, at the end of the day, just a business. They're not looking at you. There is not a lot of loyalty, and, because they can't be, they have to look at you, the numbers. They all have, quotas they have to meet. And, they're going into meetings and they're having to say whether their books are successful. And so if you think about it, at least for me, if you think about it that way, it's less of an ego bruise, and more of, okay, well, that just didn't sell for whatever reason. I mean, there's a million reasons books don't sell, and there's nobody to point a finger at. There's just too many reasons. And so for me, I just think separating them out is what keeps me going, because I know we can write. I know we know how to do it. We've made people very happy with many books. And so that's how I strike a balance with it personally.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're generally pretty pragmatic, and I think you're right. And we both, like, Lisa comes from a TV production background. I come from a sales and marketing background. And so, you do have to, and we really are trying to say on the, like, we understand why they didn't want to be in business with us anymore. How can they sell that going in, like 2 books that haven't done well? And also there's a million people standing in line that want to take our place with our agent, with our publisher. And there's so many talented people out there. So I think you do have to understand, when you see someone taking off like a rocket, they've probably had a lot of rejection. They probably finally wrote something that got in front of the right person at the right time, and they had a lot of luck. And that doesn't mean that they're not incredibly talented. They have that, but they've earned it. Like, I guarantee you 9 times out of 10 that, like, the Catherine Center, again, it's a perfect thing. People are like, wow, she just like came out of nowhere and took off. Well, she's been working her ass off for 10 years, probably, before that book hit. So I just think it's important that you don't, like, you surround yourself with other authors that are also pragmatic. I think it's easy, and this happens even in my other line of work. I try not to get too involved with people that are really negative, because I think it's really easy to start feeling sorry for yourself. And not that we have not felt sorry for ourselves. And anyone that has listened to those podcasts know that we did have moments, but you do have to turn around, and you also have to just laugh at yourself and laugh at it a little bit. And we've been getting some of the message we've been getting, and I didn't get a chance to post this, but I've had like 5 authors either text or message us just in the last week that they've gotten step aside emails, just like since we posted. And one of them said today, it still stung, but I actually laughed when I got the email because of your podcast. It made me feel a little bit better. It wasn't as awful.
I love that you're using it with your kids. Was it you who said that in the podcast, or was that you, Lisa?
No, it
was Liz.
Yeah, that's pretty hilarious. So I'm also a writer under a pen name, and I got so many rejections for, gosh, I don't even remember which novel, that I made poetry out of it, because you said in the podcast that they use the same phrases over and over, and they do. And as you said, I'm very pragmatic. Also, I understand this is a business. I understand that it's also very personal for people, and you have to. That's something I think it would be helpful, that I love that you said in your podcast, is authors should understand nobody wants to reject you. They're not hurting you on purpose. It's a completely subjective business where that is part of the business. They will reject many more people than they won't. And it just, there's some canned responses, and it doesn't, you guys said such a great thing. It has nothing to do necessarily with your talent or the worth of your book. It is subjective as to the person reading it, the day that they are reading it, the publishing atmosphere, what is selling at that time, whether they can take it to their team and their team also gets enthusiastic about it. There are so many variables that really have nothing to do with you and the work. And so learning how to hold on to that self-confidence, or at least belief in your own work, even when it flags, to be able to pick it back up again. That's a huge basic skill I think a writer has to have a career that lasts. And a career that lasts, let's just review, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get on the New York Times bestseller list and you're going to make your fortune. You may not even make a viable living at it. You may always, I talk about that your day job may be your writing career might be the job you work to support your writing. That's your writing career, is whatever you do to make money. And so you said something earlier, Liz, that I love, that find the joy in that. Like, what is it that you love, and what can you do with your life if your ship does not come in and you are not J.K. Rowling, how can you still love this and do it so that you don't wind up giving up on it when you don't want to? One of you said something about being in bed for, however many days.
Of us, yeah.
Well, Holly, our agent now, Holly Root, probably I think what ultimately led us to sign with her is she said to us on the phone, you need to write what makes you happy. I mean, it's really that simple. Because we've written different types of genres, and we could have gone in a number of directions when we came to her. And she said, as long as you're happy and you're writing while you're happy and it makes you happy, that's it. And that really is very simple, but it's true. If you just stick to that, and that's how you get the joy in it. I mean, because if you're trying to chase the market and you're trying to write the next this or that, it's not going to work, because they're already 2 years down the pipeline with that. It's already way ahead. You're going to play catch up the whole time, and then it's not even really you. And so her attitude has always been one of just positivity and staying happy with it. And that helps us a lot and helps remind us why we really do this. And I think you can get caught up in that thought processes of, I've just got to hit the New York Times and I've got to do this or else it's not worth it. And I think if you get over there, then you won't be happy. We've had, and I think that's what happens to a lot of authors and why they might quit or just, just hate it because they're chasing after the wrong end game, I guess. And it took us a while to realize that, though, believe me. We had to hit absolute, I think, rock bottom. The Audible rejection, I think it was just after that, we're like, okay.
Like my issue with the Audible rejection, truly, I think, like, it's fine. It was only 2 paragraphs, right? But my issue was, like, she basically said, I'm not going to buy anything from these guys because they clearly can't sell an audiobook. She didn't say it like that. She was very nice, and respectful. But that is what I heard. And I'm just like, man, we can't even sell like an audio short story, which we have a bunch of short stories. Like I had this whole thing, like we could like do that. And I love listening to them. So for me, I don't know why that hit me really hard, where it was just like, we're never going to buy one of these things.
I think we thought that was a slam dunk. I mean, we could do that, no problem. And then when that rejection came in, but again, that rejection is based on sales. We had not sold very many audiobooks, even with The Good Widow. I think it was, all of our books across the board. I just don't think audio was the thing, for us.
It's interesting.
And so if you separate it and you look at it like that, then she's just doing her job. She would
Absolutely.
have no business signing us up for an Audible when she has all of these people. You see all the Audibles that come out, like they don't need ours. So It made sense. But when you initially read that email, and she was probably more straightforward than most, and I think we were used to the,
I'm going to step aside.
I was just going to have to step aside. Hers was like, listen, and maybe we needed that. Maybe we just needed someone.
She was honest. Everyone else is
like,
oh my God, Liz and Lisa, I just love their Instagram and they're so amazing. And wow. And like, but no. And I think
it's almost like,
oh girl, they cannot sell an audiobook. I mean, listen, and the idea is okay. Like maybe we could make it work, but they clearly can't sell any audiobooks. So, but she was being honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that has to do with expectations too, is being able to moderate what they are. You guys keep saying everyone's doing their job. And I think knowing that can help mitigate the impact of that. But one thing this sort of makes me think about, and that I think a lot of authors struggle with, is there's this constant messaging of do social media and do outreach and do your marketing and hire a PR person. How much of this is really within the author's control? If you look at the two of you, you have huge platforms. What do you have, like 43,000 followers on, is it Facebook or Instagram? It's nuts. And you've got these high profile exposures with your television show, and you've been doing book recs for I don't know how long. Everybody wants a Liz and Lisa shout out. By all accounts, you're doing everything right. And yet you've just talked about your sales for X book weren't as good as you hoped they would be. your audiobooks aren't selling. How much is within our control, and how much of that can you get? Should you actually put your eggs in that basket, knowing that?
It's important to stay in the game is the first thing I think about. And so that's staying in the game. And it's reminding people, like, I can go on television and I can talk about a book, or I'm still here on social media. Remember us? And so for me, I think it isn't in our control. It's really not. I mean, the Bookstagram community is amazing. They do awesome things for books. They get the books out there, but how many books does that sell? I don't know. I mean, it's so you can do all the things and still not be a quote unquote success. So I think for us, we've just wanted to stay in the game with these other, and we like it too. I mean, believe me,
be enjoying it.
We did a whole thing over the summer though. And Liz, sometimes these pop up and I cringe, but we did this 30 days of books thing. And
I thought they were hilarious. Why do you cringe? You did mine on one of them.
I know, but they didn't. It didn't help. I mean, so that's the thing. It's like it made us feel good and they were fun, but what did it really do for at least for our own book? But does that negate
it? Because you can't know, right? Like you just said, you kind of have to try stuff.
That's to the point I was going to make. So books and marketing is a fast moving target. Mm-hmm. So the one thing I noticed when we had a book coming out a year is something that had worked. We always came out in summer, right? So like something that would work one June, the next June, we were planning, you start planning with your marketing and publicity team, and probably in February, March, wasn't working anymore. And so you have to constantly be pivoting, particularly if you have a book coming out every year, because something that may have hugely worked, maybe the first, group of people that went in and executed these things well benefited, and then everyone executed, then nobody cares about it anymore. I think Lisa's right. You've got to do it because you want to do it. And we love talking about other books and supporting other authors. And we do that just because we want to. Like we never were getting, anything out of that. That's just something that we think it's important to do. But as far as like book launching and what works and publicity, I mean, my goodness, that it is such a fast moving target. You really have to have your finger on the pulse and be creative and really get there first with some of those ideas. And like, look at Book Talk as a perfect example, right? Like before it was Bookstagram, now it's Book Talk, and they have about 10 authors whose their sales have blown up, right? So I'll be curious to see how long that lasts and how many authors get that boost before it moves on to something else, and then it's not translating to sales anymore. So
that's what can be so frustrating, I think, is there is no magic formula, there's no magic bullet, and it's so much of it is just sheer chance and out of your control. And yet, what can you do except, like you said, Lisa, stay in the game, and if you want your work to reach people, you have to keep trying ways to do it, ways that feel right for you. Dan Blank does a lot of marketing that he calls human-centered marketing that I think feels really organic, because it lets the author decide what feels right for me to be able to talk about the work I love and reach people I want to reach with it.
I think and also being on brand. So like I think most authors that spend a lot of time, they may not even realize they have a brand or that they're branding, but they have a brand. And it's not something Lisa and I talk about a lot because our stuff is pretty organic, but we are who we are and we have a brand. And so I do think it's important when you're looking at what levers you want to pull for yourself. Like, are you staying on brand? Are you being yourself? Because I think that consumers are very savvy. So like sometimes I'll see an author, God bless them, like kind of go off brand to trying to like fit themselves into the box. And I'm just like, ooh, like that's, not really working. But I appreciate and understand why they're doing that. But I do think when you're thinking about the things you want to do, like who are you? What are you really comfortable doing? Are you comfortable on camera? Are you comfortable doing this? Because I think people know when you're not. And it's okay
the same. It's the same thing. It's like, don't write a book that is in a genre you don't really know how to write, and don't try to do social media in a way that isn't you. And the reason I cringe when those videos come up is just because that summer we were just trying so hard to control the outcome of our book. And we just couldn't. I mean, despite all the things we did, and we had fun doing it, and we just had all these different setups and crazy hats and all the things, and it just didn't move the needle on how to save a life. And so that's just crushing when I remember how hard we tried, but that doesn't mean we won't try hard in the future. We'll just try something different. I mean, you have to like try and fail and try and fail. That's what this whole thing is, whether it's a video that you do in your backyard or it's the book you're writing. You just have to try and fail until you figure it out.
I'm hearing persistence is something I have always used as sort of a catchword for how I operate in this business. But what I'm hearing from you guys that I love is resilience.
Mm-hmm.
You get knocked down and you're going to get knocked down.
Yeah, you got to get punched in the face. Your teeth might even get knocked out. You like all the things.
Song? You get knocked down, but I get up
again.
Chumbawamba.
Yeah, I get knocked down. Wow.
Worked in a record store in the 80s, baby.
Oh
I know them all.
God. That's good.
Well,
all right. So y'all said one thing I want to explore, and then I have a question, and I don't want to keep you too long. You keep coming back to ideas that revolve around the writing community. You have always, both of you, been incredibly supportive and giving to the community, involved in the writing community. You talk about how when you were looking for an agent, you went to your writing community. How important is that in a career with longevity? And how do you make yourself a part of it?
It's so important. There's a lot, I know a lot of, we're not really involved in like, Tiffany, you're about the Women's
Fiction Writers Association.
Yeah.
That's my home organization.
So many people talk about that organization as being so amazing. And then there's RWA, there's all these groups. And I think because we have each other, we've never really joined because we're each other's like group. But I think, having that kind of support. And then also, I think a great way in any business, and this is in my other career too, like, be the person you want other people to be for you. So like when people come to you, be supportive, like be generous, be helpful, be hopeful for them. And then I think you have the right to ask that back of other people, and just, be happy for others. I think it's really important. Like, and I think like, if you've never showed up for anybody and then you need something and you start calling, listen, there's people that will help you, but like, you need to earn that professional equity, in my opinion.
Yes. And don't be afraid. And we talked about this, to take up space. Like when we were starting out, I just have a very clear memory of sitting down with my laptop in my living room. And I just went through Facebook and I reached out to like all of these authors and just said, hey, we're just starting out and we've got this website and we want to be highlighting books and we'd love to connect with you. And Sarah Pekkanen was one in particular that responded right away. And we just formed like a friendship with her. And then the next person responded, next person. And but we weren't afraid to just be like, hey girl, you don't know who I am, but
you weren't coming with an ask. I think that's key. You were coming with a give.
A give. Yes. Because we thought strategically from the beginning, we should have a website. And it, at the time was called Chicklet is Not Dead, because everybody was saying, oh, this Chicklet, it's over, it's dead. And we were like, no, it's not. We still want to write that. So that was what our website was called. But strategically, we thought we should highlight and support these authors that are either starting out or are already established and just need people to hear about their books. And it was a great way for us to meet authors as well. And we were huge readers and huge fans of so many of these people like Sarah. And so it just felt like a no-brainer for us, but we weren't really afraid to even reach out to authors that probably some of them might've been like, who's this? Like, I don't need you. But
I think there's a genuineness to what you're describing. Like a lot of people think of networking as this schmoozy, yucky thing. And it certainly can be. I mean, I know authors who network in a yucky way where it feels very transactional, but there's a difference in approaching it genuinely the way that you just described. You're doing something for the community, talking about books that benefits you. Yes, that's realistic, but you're also coming to people with, hey, let me feature you. How can I help you?
Right.
And I do think, to your point, Liz, that at some point, if you're putting that out into the world and into your community, you do have a right to ask for it back at some point. But I think going into it with that, there's a really subtle shade of difference between doing it with a genuine open heart and doing it with this yucky kind of, I want something from you, so I'm offering.
Well, right. And we weren't doing it for that. And then, it just so happened, later when this agent thing went on and, we were like, like we need some help. Yeah. And everyone was so generous when we asked. And I do think it's important that we don't get so caught up in our own success that you're not willing to help other people, that, or you just got to, and Lisa mentioned this on the podcast, but you do have to find a space where you're happy for other people, even when you are truly failing. And if you can get there, it will really change you. And it is something, and again, we have each other. So it's different because, if she gets in a hole or I get in a hole, the other person will be like, hey, you know what? This person's worked really hard, and it's okay to be happy for them, even if they're getting all the things that you want.
And it's also okay to be envious, and it's okay to have that moment of this feels shitty.
You need to lean into the envy and the disappointment for a little bit, just a minute. You don't have to just pretend.
You can't deny it's not there, because then that does make you plasticky. But you can say
they can coexist.
Yes, I want what you have, and I'm happy that you have it.
Right. It is. We're not saying put those feelings aside. So we're absolutely not saying that. What we're saying is we will have conversations where I'm like, I am so goddamn jealous of this, but I know that this person has earned it. I hope to get it one day, but man, I am so jealous. I felt almost like nauseous when I saw this.
Right.
They can coexist. They're not mutually exclusive, but you have to have the self-awareness of your jealousy, because what I have seen sometimes is people just attack that. Well, she's not good. I read that book. It's like, no, they don't do that. Like, recognize that you feel jealous about it.
Which is human.
Like to reach there. But that also, like, what is that? I always say this thing wrong, but like the tide rising,
rising tide lifts all boats. I love that.
And I'll be honest, guys, like women authors achieving things is good for all of us. They're getting movie deals, getting publishing deals, podcasts. It's good for all of us.
And their success does not take away from the piece of, there's not a finite pie. Their success doesn't mean you don't get that piece of pie. It, like you said, it's the pie is infinite, and it means that there's more pie for you to get in on. It's creating a readership
them and bringing them down is going to get you where you want to be,
and it's going to eat your soul.
Well, right. Acknowledge. I think there's nothing wrong with being jealous. I'm jealous all the time about stuff. I think you have to have a self-awareness about it.
It's part of that realistic, it's part of being an author, I think. And it's funny, I'm thinking about this a lot now because I'm working on a follow-up to intuitive editing that's about character development. And I talk about our best resource is ourself. And as authors, there's so much you can learn by being self-aware, to your point, Liz, like understanding that all these things that you feel are human. There's every infinite combination in us of good and evil. And we can feel horrible things and do horrible things and still feel great things and do great things and be decent human beings, because all that's just superhuman, and that's okay. But if we put that away from us, not only, I think, does that make us fake in our interactions with people, and that makes it harder to be happy for people, but then I think it makes you less genuine in your writing too. You have to get pretty naked and real to be a great writer. All right. I promised I'd keep you an hour, but I can't let you go. First of all, I want to thank you for being with me today, and also just the wonderful experience of having gotten to work with you all these years, which is such a pleasure. I miss it so much. I can't tell you. But the fact that what you've done, I think, is it's part of what you do by giving back to the writing community. You're sort of laying it all out there on your podcast, I think, is a gift to the community. So thank you for that. But before I let you go, I'm thinking of like newer authors here, but also authors who have been in the business longer and maybe aren't where they want to be or have been where they want to be. And then, you could be a New York Times bestseller and then nobody buys your next book. Things happen. What's your advice for somebody who loves this as a career and wants to do it as a career? What's the best way to approach that in a way that's going to make that viable and have legs and longevity?
Hmm.
Okay.
No, I'm thinking.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'll go. I mean, I think that you need to understand you're not alone, that we all have a shared experience that, is interesting. I'll just say this, and this is a perfect example of why you just have to keep hope. So a lot of people were messaging us with very specific things that had gone on. And then Stephen Rowley and Brenda Janowitz actually put it in their story and tagged us. And so I went in and just said, hey, other successful authors, this is really important. And we've heard from all of you, why don't you share your experience and tag us? Nobody did. Now we have, and that's totally fine. But here is my point. We heard all the stories. We got calls, texts, emails, Facebook Messenger. And of course we would never share any of those things, right? But they still, for probably a myriad of reasons, and I don't know why, weren't comfortable sharing that publicly. So to aspiring authors or authors who you aren't where you want to be, we will tell you that some of your favorite authors are experiencing the same things as you, and they're not going to show you because they've got to protect themselves and their contracts and those things. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they are going through it. I promise you they are. So just keep going and to Lisa's point, find the joy. So that's my 2 cents. Lisa, what about
I love that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And then also just remember the part about this is just a business, and it's like anything. It's like when you're going on job interviews and you don't get the job. Well, maybe you didn't have it. Maybe it was timing. Maybe it was who knows what it was. It's just a business. It's not personal. And you have to know that and just remember that, because if you get too personal with it, which I know is hard because it's your baby, you're literally putting it out and hoping somebody's going to love it as much as you do. That's just not how it's going to go. So if you can take on that mindset a little bit more and separate those two things, I just think you'll have a better chance at surviving and feeling better. And knowing that, again, to Liz's point, that you're not alone, that everyone's been rejected. You're not going to find an author out there who hasn't had a rejection at some point, or at any point in their career. I just don't think so. I don't think there's anybody that's probably ever come out of the gate, debut book, hit, went on, never had an issue. Like that would be.
And if there are, I hate them.
Yeah. I think those are actually the people you can hate. It's fine.
We're allowed to hate whoever that person is, but like J.K. Rowling had like 1 million rejection. There's those stories, and I know that can be hard to think, oh, but look at her now. But you just have to remember that it's just a business.
Yeah. And think about where you want to be, like the J.K. Rowling thing. I used to be an actor, and I quit acting the day I was really unhappy and didn't know why. And I my way is to sort of Rolodex through everything going on and decide, okay, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And I got to thinking, should I quit acting? And I started smiling and I couldn't stop. And I realized, I asked myself the question, if I succeed in this as wildly as it's possible to succeed, do I want that thing? And I thought about what that would look like: the loss of privacy, the loss of anonymity, the constant needing to prove yourself, the worrying about, oh, how am I aging? Am I still getting the roles? And I thought, I don't want that. So I love what you said, Lisa, just about sort of think about even the people who you're holding up as success. Think about what that actually means. And is that a thing you want?
Right.
True.
Right.
In her case, probably, yes, we all do want that.
Right. I mean, yeah. Right. I mean, it's success is great, but you are, especially when you're creative, you're really you're public, you're really opening yourself up to, a lot of different stuff. So, and
you might get locked into a groove. I mean, Stephen King has tried to write other things outside of his genre, and some of it hits and some of it doesn't matter who you are. So, yeah. You guys have been, again, so incredibly generous with your time and your insights. Thank you for that. I'm going to stop the recording. Hold on. Yeah.